This video is brought to you by Squarespace, an all-in-one platform for building your brand and growing your business online. I have a confession, okay? I hated drinking milk as a kid. And I felt so alone in this struggle because at the time I didn't know anyone else who felt the same way. All the kids at my school loved drinking milk. This was the Got Milk campaign era after all. I felt so alone. Also, my school cafeteria would sell these little milk cartons. And I remember this one kid, Henry, not to call out Henry, but he was in my 5th grade class and he would make a big show of drinking an entire carton up through his nose every lunchtime. And the kids would be like corralling around him and they'd be like, go Henry, go Henry. And let me tell you, it was as gross as it sounds. And at the time only strengthened my anti-milk agenda. I think Henry's drink of choice was actually strawberry milk, which, speaking of flavored milk, specifically chocolate and strawberry was all the rage when I was growing up. This was before the Almond Mom takeover and we were all allowed to pump ourselves with snacks that were 95% sugar. The only flavor I remember really liking was the sadly discontinued banana-flavored Nesquik. Not only because I was obsessed with artificial banana flavors, Laffy Taffies, the yellow Laffy Taffies were one of my favorite candies at the time. But also because I felt like this flavor profile was able to easily mask the taste of regular milk pretty well. I've tried to explain what milk tastes like to me, and the closest or the only description I can come up with is that it tastes like creamy water with kind of a hint of cheese. But anyway, no matter how much I complained about it, my parents still forced me to drink milk with every meal because they wanted me to grow taller. And I just want to say I currently stand at 5'2", so basically I suffered for no reason. Despite my trials and tribulations with drinking milk, I have always loved the aesthetics of milk, which might seem weird, but its thick consistency and bright whiteness was always very visually pleasing to me. And so I would always notice milk when it was featured in TV shows and movies. And that's kind of where this video idea spawned from. As the saying goes, there is milk everywhere for those with eyes to see, or something like that.
Drink your milk.
It would be hard for the human race to get along without our foster mother, the cow.
All right, let's get rolling.
I think Squarespace is the best platform for building a website because they offer so many easy-to-use tools like pre-made templates, and they also offer a variety of customization options featuring different fonts, colors, and images. They also have many practical tools as well, including built-in analytics so that you can also track who's coming across your beautiful page. You can look through page views, traffic sources, time on site, most read content, audience geography, and more. Squarespace also has an email campaign feature allowing you to easily collect email subscribers on your site and build connections through regular email updates. Check out squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/MinaLe to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. In works of fiction, milk is often used as a representation of innocence in childhood, which makes sense. It's a popular drink for children, quite literally derived from mother's love, and it's also white in color, as we've established, and white is often a symbol of purity. One scene in Steven Spielberg's Catch Me If You Can depicts Leonardo DiCaprio's character juxtaposed against 2 older pilots. He's drinking milk in the cockpit, which highlights DiCaprio's young age and immaturity.
Would you like a drink after takeoff?
Milk?
Similarly, James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause is shown drinking milk from a bottle, emphasizing his character's struggle between the innocence of youth and impending adulthood. On the flip side, some writers will subvert milk's connotations to represent evil. One of the most popular milk drinking scenes from Hollywood is that of Malcolm McDowell drinking a glass of milk in A Clockwork Orange before committing an act of extreme violence. McDowell's character is still a teenager, and the milk he drinks, which is laced with drugs, is a symbol of his corrupted youth. A more recent example of a milk-drinking villain is that of Homelander from the TV show The Boys. Henry Ladd describes Homelander for Screen Rant as someone who grew up a superhero without a family. He is childish and self-obsessed in many ways. His milk consumption represents his desperate need to feel mothered, the self-infantilization, a manifestation of him being denied a real childhood or any maternal love. Homelander is very much a twisted child in a superhero's body. Milk's purity connotations have also led artists to subvert it to make suggestive art. For example, photographer Ellen von Unworth worked with the milkmaid trope in her 2017 series Heimat, based on her childhood home of Bavaria. One of the photos depicts a model dribbling milk into her mouth. This image is provocative as being a nod to porno facials and debased purity. Got Milk campaigns received flack for being overtly sexual in a similar way.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, baby. Yeah.
Another Von Unworth series from 1995 depicts a young Kate Moss crouching down by a refrigerator, just having sipped a bottle of milk. She wears a short, lacy dress and gives a knowing side eye as she wipes her mouth. The haphazard way groceries are strewn across the floor, as well as the fact that her bag is by the fridge and her coat is still on, implies that she rushed over to the milk bottle when she got home, unable to restrain her thirst. Wink, wink.
Dirty mind.
The connection between milk and innocence is obvious to us now, but where did all the mysticism and meaning behind milk even come from? Technically, every mammal's first food is milk. But unlike other species, humans continue to drink milk past infancy. The reason that kids are told to drink milk today usually falls in line with the idea that milk is nutritious. This has been a theory for centuries. Back in the early 1700s, Scottish physician and mystic George Cheney popularized heavy milk consumption through a diet he called simply the milk diet. Not a lot of creativity in that one. Cheney believed that a diet of milk and vegetables could combat obesity, scurvy, gout, and other health issues. Even though Cheney apparently regarded the milk diet as a last resort for the chronically ill, he also reportedly recommended it to many people and grew a significant following. So, what is the truth? One recipe from 1747 shows how Cheney's diet would have been used in everyday life. The ingredients for this milk soup are just whole milk, eggs, butter, bread, and sugar, which sounds more like a rich dessert than a healthy vegetable broth. The evolution of Cheney's writings led to the belief that milk was the most important part of a child's diet, and it would be a long time before those beliefs were challenged. By the beginning of the 20th century, early nutritional science was actually verifying these old wives' tale health claims by delivering promising data about the consumption of milk. According to Andrea S. Wiley, Elmer McCollum and others were able to demonstrate that milk was rich in a variety of vitamins and that these made rats and mice supplemented with milk grow at faster rates and to larger sizes than those that were not supplemented. At first, scientists thought vitamin A was the growth-promoting nutrient in milk. However, in the coming decades, it was discovered that this was actually calcium, which was also otherwise lacking in the American diet. Milk advertisements touting the benefits of calcium began appearing in the late 1930s. But, let's go backwards a bit. By the 1920s, some school milk programs had already been established. These were not universal, and students generally had to pay for supplementary meals. However, they were subsidized by charities like the Red Cross and the Anti-Tuberculosis Association for Needy Children. Some of these programs were mandatory, such as in Newton, Massachusetts, 10% of children in the school district were underweight and were required to participate in mid-morning milk. Giving milk to children at school became universal in 1946 when Congress established the National School Lunch Program. While the program was intended to help children receive healthy meals, it also worked to help the agricultural industry, which at the time was experiencing surpluses, especially in the dairy sector. American schools were now required to serve every child 1 cup of whole milk per day. Not only did the school lunch program help kids acquire a taste for milk at a young age, but it also impressed the importance of milk to children. Interestingly, even though I and other people my age still remember the looming presence of Big Milk in our school cafeterias, milk consumption actually peaked long before I was even born in World War II. Here are the statistics according to the USDA. Per capita, fluid milk availability in the U.S. averaged around 35 gallons per year in the 1920s and 30s and reached its maximum at around 45 gallons per year during late World War II. The average American's milk intake today stands at 19.6 gallons per year. So what happened?
We can't drink plain milk.
Why not?
It's disgusting.
Well, during World War II, food products such as meat, sugar, butter, and in some cases cheese were rationed. Fresh milk, on the other hand, remained untouched by rationing, which led to an increase in demand for it and a ramping up of milk production. Marketers even put a patriotic spin on milk drinking. As an example, here's a vintage World War II era milk bottle from Dairy Distributors Inc. Cooperative. On the bottle it reads, "Make America strong by making Americans stronger." There are a few factors to explain why milk consumption declined post-World War II. The proliferation of soft drinks coupled with the questioning of milk's health benefits helped to knock milk off its pedestal. Many schools actually have contracts with Nestle stipulating the sale of soft drinks in school vending machines in return for funding, which sounds crazy. And at my middle school, actually, we had a soft drink vending machine, and it was literally like a crack cocaine dispenser for kids. Also, I don't think milk is offered in a lot of restaurants. I never look for it on the menu, but I remember reading Andy Kreis's personal essay for Thrillist years ago. It was about the idea of milk shame and being judged for loving milk as an adult. And one thing he mentions is that a lot of the times he can't even order milk at a restaurant. He writes, "Have you ever in adulthood asked for a glass of milk to go with a slice of pizza? I have. It's actually my favorite pairing with pizza, and yet each time I've ordered it, I've been denied, to the point that I'll sometimes go to a convenience store and get a little bottle of milk to drink shamefully with my meal." Milk consumption also faltered when people began to question all of milk's so-called amazing health benefits in the 1960s. By the 70s and 80s, people started believing that we actually need to cut fat from our diets.
So you switched from whole milk to skim milk, huh? And you're eating granola?
New Kraft-free singles. Flavor like that without the fat.
Dannon low-fat yogurt.
Delicious.
It was a common idea that to combat heart disease and obesity, we needed to get rid of saturated fats completely, throw them all away. Whether this research was totally valid or not, milk was definitely victimized because of it.
You know who drinks milk? Kittens and perverts.
But milk skepticism is still alive and well today, and that movement is led by me. Just kidding. But I've actually read that the link between milk and bone health has been proven to be much weaker than we originally thought. For example, there's a 2020 paper published in the New England Journal of Medicine titled Milk and Health, co-authored by nutrition scholar and longtime dairy skeptic Walter Willett and pediatrics professor David Ludwig. In the paper, they sort through decades of research to conclude that high milk consumption during adolescence and adulthood doesn't reduce the risk of hip fracture later in life. The paper goes on to discuss the recommended calcium intake, saying the authors believe U.S. government calcium recommendations, which are based on studies with serious limitations, are too high. For all age ranges, U.S. recommendations are much higher than the United Kingdom's, and for some age ranges, they're higher than those of the World Health Organization. Nowadays, people are also more aware of alternative sources of calcium like nuts, beans, and tofu, as well as alternative milks for the lactose intolerant and environmentally/animal welfare conscious, like oat milk, almond milk, even sunflower milk, which I have yet to try, but trust I'm interested. My favorite alternative milk is actually coconut milk, which tastes bomb in a matcha latte, but unfortunately tastes terrible in a coffee, which is probably also the reason why it's rarely offered at coffee shops. Despite these changes in the industry, one of the ways Big Milk is still hanging on is by asserting themselves into school cafeterias. According to Kenny Torella at Vox, schools alone purchase around 8% of the U.S. fluid milk supply. Right now, around 20% of schools require elementary and middle school students to take milk every day. And this only continues to reaffirm milk's place as a childhood staple. As an aside, there's another link between milk and childhood, though it's pretty dark. In the 1980s and 90s, missing kids posters used to be disseminated via milk cartons. The rationale at the time was to raise awareness, and what better way to raise awareness than by plastering a missing children's poster onto an item that was purchased by almost every household in the country. By March 1985, 700 of America's 1,600 independent dairy farms began putting missing children on their packaging under the Missing Children Milk Carton Program. The program was not without its critics. Its efficacy was questioned, and the pairing of a missing kid with a child breakfast item also seemed morbid. But the program eventually phased out with the invention of the Amber Alert system in 1996. Even though it ended before I ever was able to see it on my own milk cartons, I feel like this practice was referenced often enough in the media to make a lasting impact on milk's history. A lot of milk symbolism comes from its unique color. Unique. Yes, it's white. And white is not a unique color, but not a lot of drinks are pure white. And actually, not even milk is supposed to be pure white itself. According to an article for Cabinet Magazine by Melanie Jackson and Esther Leslie, cow's milk, for its part, exists in a range between blue and yellowy orange, depending on the fat and protein content. White milk is a product of fantasy, though industry plays its role in making it in actuality through homogenization.
The defect in that one is bleach.
The writers go on to say, milk's uniform white color is achieved by separating and recombining its constituent molecules. This is the making explicit of milk, of illuminating and enlarging it as a white presence in the world. Developments of photography aided in milk's visual appeal. In 1931, Harold Edgerton developed modern strobic photography, aided by research done before him by Arthur Mason Worthington. This photography style allowed for fast-moving objects to be captured on camera. The movement of liquid was documented in Edgerton's 1936 photograph, Milk Drop Coronet, which was included in MoMA's first photography exhibition in 1937. This technology has since become standard for beverage advertising. These visual aids have definitely affected how milk is advertised to us, as well as helped create the mythos and aesthetic surrounding milk. While the color white is often meant to symbolize purity and innocence, which we can see in how white wedding dresses carry connotations of virginity, and angels are often bathed in a white light in the media, it also signifies nothingness and can be subverted for this purpose. For example, in 1941, Jean-Paul Sartre reviewed Jean Giono's translation of Herman Melville's Moby Dick and analyzed protagonist Captain Ahab's obsessive pursuit of the white whale. Sartre observed that the whiteness of the whale symbolized a kind of horrific emptiness. Similarly, Gabrielle Bellot wrote for LitHub, the book's narrator Ishmael's ultimate goal is to show that whiteness can be, and perhaps is at its core, terrifying. Is it that, as in essence, whiteness is not so much a color as the visible absence of color, and at the same time, the concrete of all colors? The universe itself, for Melville, is bleak and boreal, full only of dumb blankness. Moby Dick the whale ultimately symbolizes nothingness. In this interpretation, Captain Ahab is thus fighting against the meaninglessness of the world and is hoping that through violent action, he can find a life purpose. Conversely, nothingness can also be a positive thing, a blank slate, as in the case of the Wachowskis' The Matrix. In The Matrix, the construct is the name for a completely white, empty space where characters can load in any environment or object. The construct's vast whiteness is available for the characters to create their own meanings. Alfred Hitchcock plays with the ambiguity of milk's whiteness in his 1945 movie Spellbound. There's a scene in the movie where Gregory Peck, as John Ballantyne, is sleepwalking, and at this point in the movie, the audience fears there's something evil going on with Ballantyne. As he goes downstairs, he runs into another character, Dr. Brulov, who hands him a glass of milk that is clearly laced with something. When Ballantyne tips the glass to drink, it creates this visual effect where the milk seems to rise, almost like a tide in front of the camera, even though it's actually draining. At the peak of this moment, the screen is completely filled with the milk's whiteness. Through this camera work, the audience feels like we're losing consciousness along with Ballantyne. The dissolve gives you the sensation of melting into the milk, like being lulled into comfort, while also sensing that something dangerous is going on. In the next scene, the night is over and we hold our breath trying to figure out what could have possibly happened. Unfortunately and unsurprisingly, milk in all its whiteness is also a symbol of racial purity. In February 2017, the Museum of the Moving Image in Queens, New York, hosted an anti-Trump installation entitled "He Will Not Divide Us." The crowd-funded installation was meant to feature members of the public declaring the line, "He will not divide us," to a camera that would run a continuous feed throughout Trump's presidency. However, the project was soon canceled when alt-right protesters showed up, chugging large amounts of milk and starting physical fights. Historically speaking, white supremacist connotations of milk aren't actually new. In the 19th century, a widespread colonialist stereotype was that of the effeminate rice and corn eaters, which postulated that those who consumed large amounts of meat and dairy, aka Westerners, were more masculine and therefore naturally dominant than those that ate rice and corn, aka most of the global South. J. Leonard Corning, who was considered a well-respected medical researcher and doctor at the time, even composed a monograph in 1884 called Brain Exhaustion. In it, he argued that the colonial population lacked the intellectual vigor of the English because they didn't eat enough of the right types of Western meat and dairy products. The rhetoric followed into the early 20th century. In 1923, President Herbert Hoover told the World's Dairy Congress, "Upon this industry, more than any other of the food industries, depends not alone the problem of public health, but there depends upon it the very growth and virality of the white races." Milk is thus often the drink associated in the West with toxic hypermasculinity, though if you're really hypermasculine, you go a step beyond and guzzle raw milk, aka milk that has not been heat treated or pasteurized. Raw milk, by the way, is not recommended to drink by the FDA because it can carry harmful bacteria. And it's actually illegal to sell in many states. Still, Associate Professor James Fitzgerald notes that raw milk is leveraged by far-right figures in part because it is a lifestyle choice that harkens back to a better, simpler time when traditional social hierarchies persist. And also because many of these people are conspiracy theorists who don't trust the FDA anyway.
The things are controversial, but that's just because the government says they're controversial. They're not actually controversial. Raw eggs, raw milk.
And there's probably something there about how, they believe that they have the right to do whatever they want with their bodies. But, women don't have the right to do whatever they want with their bodies. Anyways, some filmmakers like Quentin Tarantino have referenced the connection between milk and white supremacy. In his film *Inglourious Basterds*, the main antagonist, Hans Landa, drinks milk to symbolize his commitment to Nazi ideology, as well as to maintain a level of masculine control. In Jordan Peele's Get Out, the main character's white girlfriend is shown drinking a large glass of milk at the end of the film, indicating to the audience that she, like her family, is also a believer in white supremacy. In 1994, Annie Leibovitz photographed Whoopi Goldberg laying in a milk bath, which was inspired by one of Goldberg's solo stage routines, in which the actress performed the part of a young girl who uses Clorox to turn her skin white. Leibovitz chose milk for its visually whitening effect. At the same time, in recent years, milk has actually been weaponized against white supremacy. In 2019, several right-wing and far-right leaders, including Tommy Robinson, Carl Benjamin, and Nigel Farage, were attacked with milkshakes while campaigning. Farage's first milkshaking experience was apparently a Five Guys banana and salted caramel milkshake. I say first experience because he was threatened again a few days later. A group of protesters armed with milkshakes reportedly trapped him on his campaign bus. Farage was then supposed to campaign in Edinburgh, and as a precautionary measure, local police asked the local McDonald's restaurant to stop selling milkshakes. Whoever was running the Burger King UK social media accounts took, in my opinion, the ingenious opportunity to tweet, "Dear people of Scotland, we're selling milkshakes all weekend. Have fun. Love BK. #JustSaying." Also happy to report that Farage was milkshaked again this year in June, this time with a McDonald's banana shake. As Elephant Magazine explains the appeal of milkshaking as a form of protest, there's something silly about milkshaking. The drink's frothiness gives it a certain non-violent air when used as a weapon, but it's also humiliating, a liquid that quickly sours, turning its victim stinky and visibly a bit spunky. The anger this act can impose is immortalized on a bench featured in Jenny Holzer's 1980s survival series. Emblazoned on the red granite is one of her truisms: spit all over someone with a mouthful of milk if you want to find out something about their personality fast. The very act of consuming milk is surrounded by a lot of mysticism. Yes, drinking milk is literally a life-giving act for a baby who can't eat anything else. But there's also a long history of sacred milk drinking in mythology. One early legend from Greco-Roman mythology involves Juno, whose breast milk was an elixir of immortality. The story goes that when her husband Jupiter held his illegitimate mortal kid Hercules, you might have heard of him, up to her breast to feed, Hercules' energetic sucking woke her up and she pulled away startled, spraying her milk everywhere. Up in the heavens, her milk droplets concealed into stars, creating the Milky Way, and down below on Earth, her milk sprouted lilies. Deborah Valenze writes in her book, Milk, a Local and Global History. Thus, one of the earliest interventions into maternal milk production, despite so little cooperation, results in spectacular universal distribution. According to medieval Christian legend, in the 11th century, Saint Bernard of Clairvaux sought help from the Virgin Mary, and she appeared to him as a vision. She then squeezed 3 drops of her breast milk into his mouth, empowering him with spiritual wisdom. In this instance, milk goes beyond physical nourishment to be spiritual nourishment as well. Given the mystical, life-giving properties of drinking milk, it makes sense why screenwriters like to play with the unsettling idea that drinking milk could actually be deadly. Some examples include The Two Mrs. Carols from 1947, Bitter Harvest from 1981, The Woods from 2006, and Confessions from 2010. One of the most famous and earliest examples, however, is Alfred Hitchcock's 1941 movie Suspicion. In the movie, there's a scene where Cary Grant's character Johnny brings a glass of milk to his wife Lena, played by Joan Fontaine, who has recently suffered a nervous collapse. Prior to this scene, she has become increasingly paranoid with the belief that Johnny wants to kill her. Lena's suspicion falls on the glass of milk as a source of poison, as does the audience's. In an interview with Francois Truffaut, Alfred Hitchcock explains how he directed the scene. I put a light right inside the glass because I wanted it to be luminous. Cary Grant's walking up the stairs and everyone's attention had to be on that glass. Because otherwise we'd all be staring at Cary Grant's beautiful face. The reason this trick works so well on camera is because the makeup of milk itself. In his monograph, Milk and Melancholy, Kenneth Hayes explains that because of milk's chemical composition, the scattering of light rays within milk gives it an appearance both dense and luminous. He continues by saying, milk's unique receptivity to light causes it to shine forth as if internally illuminated, as if brightness itself were made fluid. Milk thus shares in the allure possessed by all glowing things. And according to English professor Matthew Beaumont, the glowy look of Hitchcock's milk adds another layer of eeriness. He writes, Johnny's milk in Suspicion is too good to be true. It is too white to be comfortably emblematic of innocence. Another famous instance of dangerous milk is in A Clockwork Orange, which I talked about earlier. The milk concoction the boys drink in the movie is called Moloko Plus. Moloko is derived from the Russian word for milk, and plus implies that there is something else added to the milk. While the milk is not explicitly poisoned, it's poisonous in the sense that the main character Alex and his friends become deranged and violent after drinking it. I want to quickly add here, though, that the poison milk trope doesn't only come from this idea of subversion, and that there are actual real-life historical ties to the media phenomenon that these movies could be drawing from. For instance, in the 19th century, an illness known as milk sickness affected people in the Midwest and areas surrounding the Ohio River Valley. Symptoms of the disease included weakness, abdominal pain, and vomiting, sometimes leading to complete loss of muscle coordination, coma, and death. Milk sickness could reportedly kill up to half the members of a frontier community. Some settlements completely collapsed, leaving ruins to be found by the next wave of colonizers. The Medical Repository reported in 1811 it has been conjectured by many that this affection depended on poisoned milk. Eventually, they discovered the cause of the poisoned milk was white snake root, a woodland shade plant eaten by cows that strayed from their pasture. Also, throughout the 19th century, the newly industrializing dairy industry came with its own set of hygiene problems. As Mark Kurlansky has recorded, large stables holding hundreds of cows were established adjacent to breweries. The runoff from the beer-making process, known as swill, was fed to the cows, which were kept in overpopulated and disease-ridden stables via wooden chutes. Feeding the cows swill led them to produce thin, blue-tinted milk that then needed to be supplemented not only with water, which increased the volume of the liquid, but also annatto and chalk. Yummy, which enriched its color and texture. This new milk, known as swill milk, ended up causing an unprecedented amount of infant deaths. Thus, milk in mass-produced form, aka the form the majority of us consume it in, has always been closely tied to being poisonous. But it isn't just cow's milk that lends to feelings of uneasiness and horror in the right context. Breast milk and the act of breastfeeding itself is also a popular trope used in many horror films. Kyle McNeil wrote for the New York Times about the prevalence of the trope, pointing out various examples, including The Hills Have Eyes, where a mutant forcibly breastfeeds a woman, The Wicker Man, where a nursing mother holding an egg appears in a dream sequence, and Rosemary's Baby, where Rosemary breastfeeds her demon child. He goes on to quote Anna Bogutskaya, "Horror puts a twisted magnifying glass on very natural images like breastfeeding and amplifies the complicated feelings that arise from motherhood. In Mad Max Fury Road, breastfeeding is used as a means of oppression. Women are forced to produce milk for the state as wet nurses. The antagonist, Immortan Joe, who created this human milk industry, is meant to represent the control of man over nature and the ultimate patriarchal domination fantasy." There's also sexual connotations that lend a sense of taboo and disgust to breastfeeding scenarios in horror. More recent films such as Infinity Pool and Titan play with the forbidden boundary between sex and motherhood. The visceral reactions associated with breastfeeding imagery, whether positive and maternal or horrifying, are intrinsically linked with the idea of uncontrollable leaking. In most societies, leaking bodies, especially those of women, are viewed with fear and disgust. Sarah Arnold, the author of maternal horror film Melodrama and Motherhood, put it, "The leaking body lacks boundaries. It is literally fluid and in flux." Leaking bodies and maternity in general have easily found a home in the world of horror films, which loves to spotlight anything society deems as gross. One of those gross things is the mixing of blood and milk, which has roots in being a cross-culturally prohibited practice. As Barbara Creed writes in her essay, The Monstrous Feminine, one of the strongest of food taboos relates to the ancient imperative that blood and milk should be kept separate. Philosopher and literary critic Julia Kristeva has pondered the symbolic association between breast milk and blood, particularly menstrual blood. Horror films construct a border between what Kristeva refers to as the clean and proper body and the abject body, or the body which has lost its form and integrity. One of the best examples of this cultural phenomenon being exploited in film is the movie Possession, which is a surrealist horror movie depicting the crumbling marriage between an outwardly normal-looking heterosexual couple, Anna and Mark. The movie was actually inspired by director Andrei Zuovsky's own divorce from his ex-wife. In the DVD commentary, Zuovsky explains, "The story of Possession is the story of my life. It's the only film I've made that is autobiographical." The horror twist ensues when Mark finds out that Anna is having an affair with a horrific monster that secretes milk and blood. Rachel Sharp and Sophie Sexton wrote an analysis of the movie and theorized that the monster represents society's deformed heteronormative forces. Under the monster's command, Anna goes on a killing spree, murdering characters who are involved in affairs and who thus threaten the nuclear family unit. Each killing also features liquids associated with maternity. Zimmerman is beaten to death with a jar of milk, and Maggie bleeds to death. The film relies on the use of these fluids to inspire fear and then turn this fear back on Anna and her maternal body. Sharp and Sexton go on to discuss how Anna's white, red, blue color scheme recurs repeatedly to show how feminine monstrosity is depicted as an awkward juxtaposition of roles. White symbolizes innocence and virginity, red symbolizes blood and disorder associated with menstruation, and blue symbolizes motherhood and Marian imagery. They write, "It is impossible to be a virgin, a lover, and a mother simultaneously in one body. The horror of this plays out in the mixing of the abject fluids of breast milk and blood, staining Anna's blue gown in Possession in that one famous tunnel scene." The tunnel scene, which is my favorite scene in the movie, in which Anna is like screaming, thrashing around, and actually has a miscarriage, actually resulted in a ban on the film's screening in many European cities and in the UK. It was rendered so disturbing not only by virtue of Isabella Gianni's striking improvised performance, but also by the extreme use of fluids. There is something horrifying about how her body can produce or leak that much fluid. What's more is that these fluids remind us of where we came from and that in the earliest stage of our life, we were viscerally connected to someone else. As cultural studies lecturer Aaron Harrington says, we like to think of ourselves as contained individuals. Our belly buttons say otherwise. So, despite the fact that milk has such a rich symbolism, there is debate over the fate of dairy in the American diet. The dairy industry has been proven to be unstable for financial and environmental reasons, and many people choose to opt out of milk for health purposes. Big Dairy has attempted to bring the masses back, but with mixed results. In May 2023, the Milk Processor Education Program, or Milk PEP, aka the quasi-governmental dairy industry organization that ran the Got Milk campaigns of the 90s and 2000s, they collaborated with Aubrey Plaza on a satirical ad for Wood Milk. The ad basically pokes fun at plant-based milk, with the main idea being that only real milk is real.
Is wood milk real? Absolutely not. Only real milk is real. Then what did I invest in?
Unsurprisingly, it ended up facing significant backlash. The Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, the PCRM, even filed a complaint last year with the FDA, claiming that the Wood Milk ad violated federal law. They argued that the dairy industry was trying to illegally influence government policy around the labeling of plant-based milk. For context, a few months before the ad came out, the FDA had published draft guidance allowing for plant-based milk companies to call their products milk, which pissed off much of the dairy industry. The Wood Milk ad makes it seem like plant-based alternatives are running big dairy out of business, but in actuality, dairy milk's biggest competitors right now are other non-milk beverages, like water and specialty coffee drinks, though sales of plant-based milk are expected to grow by more than 9% a year through 2027. Big Dairy's biggest hurdle is appealing to Gen Z, who have grown up under sustainability messaging. Also, 29% of America's Zoomers are immigrants or children of immigrants, with many coming from backgrounds where lactose intolerance is common. Still, some people are predicting a return for dairy. Writer Sherry Ning tweeted last year, "The next counter-revolution is the return of whole milk." She associates the modern disinterest in dairy milk as being partly influenced by tech bro culture and its over-engineered, health-optimized lifestyle. She says, "The return of cow's milk is kind of the cultural zeitgeist saying, screw tech, this is too fast and science is going too far. Just go back to normal and stop engineering the way we live." Regardless of the fate of milk consumption in the future, milk's significance in human history will most likely still uphold it as a powerful symbol in our culture. Poisoned almond milk just doesn't have the same ring to it. Okay, guys, thank you so much for listening to me talk about this subject. Let me know in the comments what your feelings are about milk. Are you a milk hater like moi? Or do you have messed up taste buds? Just kidding. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. I'll see you next time. And yeah, thank you. Bye.
And so we leave Princess May mothering not only her own baby, but in reality, the whole human race.